They laughed when the old veteran missed, until the range officer checked behind the target. "You even know which end the bullet comes out of, old-timer." The voice dripped with mockery, cutting through the morning air at Riverside Public Shooting Range like a poorly aimed shot. Staff Sergeant Derek Martinez, all of 28 years old, with his freshly pressed BDUs and his clipboard held like a shield of authority, stood watching the elderly man fumble with the worn leather case of what appeared to be an ancient rifle. The case itself looked like it had seen more years than the range had been in operation. Its corners rubbed smooth, the leather cracked and weathered like the hands that held it. Thomas McAllister didn't respond immediately. His fingers, gnarled with age and marked by liver spots that mapped out 8 decades of living, worked the brass clasps with deliberate care. The morning sun caught the silver stubble on his jaw, illuminating a face carved by time into deep valleys and ridges. His eyes, a faded blue like worn denim, remained focused on his task. He wore a simple flannel shirt, faded red and black checks that had been washed to softness, tucked into khaki pants that had seen better decades. Everything about him whispered of retirement homes and forgotten relevance, of Social Security checks and afternoon naps. "Sir, I asked you a question," Martinez pressed, his voice carrying that particular edge of impatience reserved for those who believe their time is more valuable than others. He shifted his weight, his tactical boots scraping against the concrete, the sound harsh and demanding. "This is a serious facility. We have standards here. Maybe you'd be more comfortable at the senior center's pellet gun range." The other range users, mostly weekend warriors in their tactical gear and expensive sporting rifles, chuckled at the comment. One of them, a contractor named Brad, who spent more on ammunition than most people spent on groceries, actually laughed out loud. Thomas finally looked up, and for just a moment something flickered in those weathered eyes. Not anger, not even irritation, but something deeper, something that had been folded away and stored like a flag from a coffin. "I know my way around a rifle, son," he said quietly, his voice carrying the slight rasp of age but steady as bedrock. He lifted the rifle from its case with movements that seemed almost ceremonial, revealing a Springfield M1903, its wood stock bearing the scars of actual service, not the artificial distressing of a reproduction. The metal had been cared for with an attention that bordered on reverence, the bolt action smooth despite its age. Martinez snorted, actually snorted, like a bull dismissing a matador's cape. "That thing belongs in a museum, not on my range. You got papers for that antique? Registration? You even got a valid driver's license, Gramps." He was playing to his audience now, the small crowd of afternoon shooters who had paused in their own preparations to watch the confrontation. It was entertainment, the kind that made them feel younger, more vital, more relevant. "Look, I don't have time for this. You've got 5 minutes to prove you can handle that relic safely, or I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Insurance liability, you understand." The old man's hands moved with surprising fluidity as he began to check the rifle, his fingers finding each point of inspection without conscious thought. Bolt action, smooth as silk despite its years. Chamber clear, barrel clean enough to use as a mirror. Every movement spoke of muscle memory carved so deep it had become part of his DNA. 5 minutes should be sufficient, Thomas said, and there was something in his tone that made Martinez's smirk falter for just a second. From his position at the spotting scope, 3 lanes down, Master Sergeant Jake Sullivan watched the interaction with growing unease. Something about the way the old man held that rifle, the way his body naturally aligned even while standing still, triggered recognition in Sullivan's mind. He had seen that stance before in grainy black and white photos in the base museum, in documentary footage of a different kind of warfare, when marksmanship was a matter of iron sights and steady hands. not computerized scopes and match-grade ammunition. Sullivan quietly pulled out his phone, his fingers moving across the screen with purpose. Thomas loaded 5 rounds into the Springfield, with the kind of economy of motion that spoke of countless repetitions. Each cartridge slid home with a soft metallic whisper, .30-06 rounds that seemed almost quaint compared to the modern ammunition being fired around him. He didn't hurry, didn't acknowledge the snickers from the peanut gallery that had formed behind Martinez. His world had narrowed to the rifle, the target, and the space between them. 100 yards. In his mind, the distance stretched and contracted, became a rice paddy in Korea, a hillside in Vietnam, a rooftop in Beirut. "Whenever you're ready to embarrass yourself, Pops," Martinez called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Standard target, center mass. Let's see if you can even hit paper." He had his clipboard ready, pen poised to write up what he fully expected to be a safety violation report. The afternoon sun was high now, casting sharp shadows across the range, the heat making the air shimmer slightly at the far end where the targets waited like patient accusers. Thomas moved into position with a fluidity that seemed impossible for his age. His body folded into the shooting stance like water finding its level, the rifle becoming an extension of his skeletal structure. The first shot cracked across the range, sharp and clean. Martinez, watching through his binoculars, shook his head. "Miss, complete miss, didn't even hit paper." The second shot followed, then the third, fourth, and fifth, each spacing perfect, the rhythm metronomic. 5 shots, 5 misses, Martinez announced triumphantly. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to—" "Check behind the target." The voice came from behind them, strong and carrying unmistakable authority. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Richardson stood at the range entrance, her dress uniform immaculate despite the heat, her expression carved from stone. Master Sergeant Sullivan stood beside her, his face carefully neutral. "Staff Sergeant Martinez," I said, "check behind the target frame." Martinez's face went through several shades of confusion before settling on uncertain compliance. "Ma'am, with all due respect, he missed. I watched through the—" Richardson's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes made Martinez stop mid-sentence. He jogged down range after calling ceasefire, his confident stride becoming less certain with each step. When he reached the target, he stopped, looked at the unmarked paper, then following some instinct he couldn't name, he looked behind it. The 5 holes were so close together they formed a single ragged opening in the wood post behind the target. Not in the target, behind it, through the exact same hole. 5 shots, 1 hole at 100 yards with iron sights and an 80-year-old rifle. Martinez's face went white, then red, then white again. He walked back slowly, his tactical boots suddenly feeling like they were made of lead, each step a meditation on humility. "Sergeant Martinez," Richardson's voice could have etched glass, "are you familiar with the name Thomas McAllister?" Martinez shook his head, unable to speak. 3-time distinguished marksman, Silver Star, Bronze Star with V device, Purple Heart ×2, Marine Corps Scout Sniper, Korea and Vietnam, CIA Special Activities Division, locations classified, 63 confirmed kills, though the actual number is considerably higher. She paused, letting the weight of the words settle like stones in still water. He trained the instructors who trained your instructors. He wrote the manual you learned from, though his name was classified at the time. The range had gone completely silent. Even the insects seemed to have paused their afternoon chorus. Thomas stood quietly, the Springfield held loosely in his hands, his expression unchanged. He had heard these words before, these recitations of his service record, and they meant less to him than the weight of the rifle in his hands. What mattered were the faces he still saw in his dreams, the brothers who didn't come home, the missions that succeeded because of a single well-placed shot. Mr. McAllister, Richardson continued, her tone shifting to something approaching reverence, retained his top-secret clearance until 2015. He still consults for Quantico on advanced marksmanship techniques. Last year, at the age of 79, he placed third in the National Long-Range Championships with that rifle. She turned to Martinez, and her expression could have peeled paint. Staff Sergeant, you've just insulted a man who has forgotten more about marksmanship than you will ever learn. A man who spent nights in jungle humidity waiting for one shot that would save an entire platoon. A man whose classified service record, if it could be fully told, would humble anyone who claims to understand sacrifice. Martinez's clipboard fell from nerveless fingers, clattering on the concrete with a sound like judgment. Sir, I didn't. I'm sorry, The words tumbled out like brass casings, hollow and spent. The crowd that had gathered to laugh now stood in uncomfortable silence, their expensive gear suddenly feeling like costumes, their weekend warrior status exposed as the play-acting it was. Brad, the contractor who had laughed the loudest, had actually removed his cap, holding it against his chest like a man at a funeral. Thomas finally moved, setting the rifle down with careful precision. He walked over to Martinez, his gait showing the slight hitch of old injuries that most hadn't noticed before. Up close, Martinez could see the thin white line of a scar that ran from the corner of the old man's eye down to his jaw, could see the way his left hand didn't quite close all the way, evidence of damage that modern medicine hadn't been available to fully repair. Son, Thomas said quietly, so quietly that Martinez had to lean in to hear, the measure of a man isn't in the equipment he carries or the authority he wields. It's in the respect he shows to others regardless of their apparent station. The old Marine's eyes moved across the assembled crowd, taking in their tactical vests, their match-grade rifles, their expensive scopes. Every one of you has the right to be here, to practice, to enjoy this sport. But remember that this sport exists because men and women used these skills to keep you free, not for score, not for bragging rights, but for survival and service. His voice carried despite its softness, reaching into corners of consciousness that had been comfortable in their ignorance. The rifle doesn't make the marksman. The uniform doesn't make the soldier, and age doesn't diminish honor. Richardson stepped forward. Mr. McAllister, on behalf of the United States Marine Corps and everyone here, I apologize for the disrespect you've endured today. Your service, your sacrifice, and your continued dedication to the craft deserve better than what you received. She snapped to attention and rendered a salute so crisp it could have been used in a training manual. Sullivan followed suit, and then, one by one, every veteran on the range did the same. Even some of the civilians, not sure of the protocol but understanding the moment, attempted their own gestures of respect. Thomas returned the salute slowly, his own form still precise despite the arthritis that made every movement a small victory against time. Colonel, I appreciate the gesture, but it's unnecessary. I came here to shoot, same as everyone else, to feel the rifle kick, to smell the cordite, to remember. He trailed off, his eyes distant for a moment, seeing faces that existed now only in memory and old photographs. To remember when these skills meant something more than points on a target. Martinez found his voice, though it came out strangled. Sir, would you teach me? That shot, 5 rounds through the same hole, I've never seen anything like it. I thought I was good. I thought I knew what marksmanship was, but that was... He gestured helplessly at the range, at the target that still stood unmarked while the post behind it bore witness to impossible precision. That was art, that was poetry, that was everything I thought I was but am not. A small smile creased Thomas's weathered face, the first one anyone had seen since he'd arrived. It transformed him, made him look younger and older at the same time, like a photograph that captures both the boy who went to war and the man who came back. Staff Sergeant, the first lesson is the hardest one. Humility. Looks like you've already started learning it. He picked up the Springfield again, checking it with automatic precision. The second lesson is patience. These modern rifles, they're tools of convenience. Quick to aim, quick to fire, quick to forget. This old girl, she demands you slow down, pay attention, feel the wind, not just read it on a meter. He loaded another 5 rounds, his movements deliberate and educational now. Watch my breathing. In through the nose, hold naturally at the bottom of the exhale, squeeze, don't pull, follow through even after the shot breaks. He demonstrated, and this time everyone watched with the attention of students, not spectators. The shot rang out, and a hole appeared dead center in a fresh target Martinez had hastily set up. Your turn, son. But first, forget everything you think you know. Start with the basics: stance, sight picture, breathing, trigger control. The fundamentals don't change whether you're shooting a musket or a precision rifle. For the next 3 hours, Thomas McAllister held an impromptu clinic on the range. He corrected stances with gentle touches, adjusted grips with patient explanation, and shared wisdom earned in places where missing meant more than a lost competition. Martinez proved to be an eager student, his earlier arrogance replaced with genuine desire to learn. Others gathered around, listening to stories that weren't about glory but about discipline, about the weight of responsibility that comes with to reach out across distance and change a life with a single shot. In Korea, Thomas said during a break, accepting a bottle of water from Sullivan with a grateful nod, we didn't have these fancy rangefinders. You learn to read distance by the size of a man in your sights. You learn to feel the wind on your face and translate that to inches of drift at 300 yards. You learned that the most important shot wasn't the one that made you a hero, but the one that brought your spotter home alive. His eyes found Martinez again. You have the technical skill, Staff Sergeant. What you need to develop is the wisdom to know when not to shoot. That's the difference between a marksman and a sniper. One is about hitting the target. The other is about knowing which target matters. As the afternoon wore on, more people arrived, word spreading through the military grapevine that something special was happening at Riverside Range. Active duty personnel, veterans, even some brass from the nearby base. They came to see the legend that some of them had only heard about in whispers. The ghost who had operated in the shadows when the Cold War was hot in proxy nations around the globe. But what they found was not a legend, but a teacher, a man who had carried the weight of his skills for decades and was finally able to share them without classification stamps and need-to-know restrictions. When the range finally closed at sunset, Thomas was packing up his Springfield with the same careful attention he'd shown when unpacking it. Martinez approached one last time, his entire demeanor transformed from the morning's cockiness. Mr. McAllister, sir, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you a debt. You've taught me more about marksmanship in one afternoon than I learned in 4 years of service. But more than that, you've taught me about respect, about humility, about what service really means. Thomas closed the rifle case with a soft click. Staff Sergeant, you don't owe me anything, but you owe it to every person who walks onto this range to see them for who they might be, not what they appear to be. That young kid with the hand-me-down .22 might be the next Carlos Hathcock. That middle-aged woman learning to shoot for self-defense might save lives one day. That old-timer with the antique rifle. He smiled again. That transformative expression that bridged decades. Well, he might just teach you something if you're willing to listen. 2 weeks later, Martinez was supervising the range when Thomas returned. This time, the staff sergeant was waiting at the gate, not with a clipboard and superiority, but with respect and anticipation. "Mr. McAllister, welcome back, sir. Lane 1 is reserved for you, as always." Thomas nodded his thanks, but Martinez wasn't finished. "Sir, I've been practicing what you taught me. Would you mind taking a look at my groupings? I think I'm finally starting to understand what you meant about feeling the shot before taking it." As Thomas walked to his lane, he noticed something new. A small plaque had been mounted at Lane 1, brass letters on dark wood, "Reserved for those who served in silence and still serve through teaching." Below it, in smaller letters, "Dedicated to CWO Thomas McAllister, USMC, Retown, with profound respect and gratitude." Thomas stood looking at it for a long moment, his weathered hand reaching out to touch the smooth metal of his name. "That was Martinez's idea," Sullivan said, appearing beside him. "He paid for it out of his own pocket. Said it was the least he could do. He's also started a monthly clinic for new shooters, teaching them the fundamentals the way you taught him. Calls it the McAllister method, focusing on respect, patience, and precision in that order." Sullivan paused, then added, "You changed him, sir. Hell, you changed all of us. Reminded us what this is really about." Thomas unpacked his Springfield in silence, but those watching closely might have seen the slight tremor in his hands that had nothing to do with age. When he finally spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. "The rifle is just a tool, Sergeant. It's the hands that hold it, the eyes that aim it, and the heart that decides when to use it that matter. I spent 40 years using these skills in ways that haunted my nights. If I can spend whatever time I have left teaching them in a way that brings light instead of darkness, then maybe—" He trailed off, loading rounds with practiced ease. "Maybe that's a different kind of service." That afternoon, 5 shots rang out across Riverside Range. 5 shots that found their mark not just in the target, but in the continuation of a tradition that spans generations. The old veteran who they said had missed had, in fact, hit exactly what he was aiming for: the heart of a lesson about respect, humility, and the true meaning of marksmanship. And behind the target, where only those who knew to look would find them, 5 holes so close together they formed a single passage, a doorway between what was and what could be, between assumption and understanding, between youth's arrogance and age's wisdom. The video of that first day, captured on someone's phone and uploaded with the title, "You Won't Believe What This 80-Year-Old Veteran Did at the Gun Range," went viral within hours. Millions watched as respect was learned, humility was earned, and a legend stepped out of the shadows not for glory, but to teach. The comments section, usually a cesspool of argument and vitriol, filled with stories of other forgotten heroes, other moments of recognition too long delayed, other lessons learned from those who seemed least likely to teach them. But Thomas McAllister never saw the video. He was too busy at the range, teaching the next generation that the measure of a marksman isn't in the rifle they carry or the gear they wear, but in the respect they show and the wisdom they're willing to receive. Every Tuesday and Thursday he's there, the old man with the ancient rifle, creating holes behind the target that tell a story of precision, patience, and the kind of skill that can only be earned through service, sacrifice, and the willingness to teach others what you've learned in the hardest classroom of all, survival. If this story moved you, if it reminded you to look beyond appearances and respect the hidden heroes among us, please like this video and share it with others who need to hear this message. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that celebrate the quiet courage and untold sacrifices of those who served. And the next time you see an elderly veteran, remember, they might have missed the target you can see, but they've hit ones you never knew existed. Thank you for watching, And remember, respect is earned in drops and lost in buckets, so pour carefully.